Good evening, everyone. Hello to everyone joining in our broadcast. My name is Kelly. We're going to get started in just a couple minutes here with Melinda Myers and how to select a rain garden plant. So just sit tight and we'll get started in just a moment here. Hello to everyone joining in. We'll get started in just a moment. Just giving everyone a chance to join the broadcast, and we'll get started soon. Go ahead and get started. So hello again, everyone. My name is Kelly Bolter. I'm the Adult Programming Coordinator at Milwaukee Public Library. It is my pleasure to assist Melinda with presenting this webinar this evening. We're going to talk about how to select rain garden plants, presented by Melinda Myers and sponsored by Milwaukee Metropolitan Sewerage District and Fresh Coast Guardians. We will have a survey from Milwaukee Metropolitan Sewerage District that we're going to send out in the chat there. I'll share a link in a moment that we'd please encourage you to fill out and share your feedback with them. A little bit of housekeeping. We have at the bottom of the screen a Q&A function. So if you have any questions for Melinda, please share those questions by clicking that Q&A button. A box will appear and you can type them in the box. We will have time at the end of the presentation to answer those. And you can also feel free to chat with each other using the chat function also located at the bottom of your screen. And we are recording this as well. So we'll be sending out that recording in a couple of days to your email inbox. And I'll also be sharing Melinda's handout in the chat as well. So get that out of the way. And it is now my pleasure to hand it over to Melinda for tonight's presentation. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Kelly, and thanks to all of you for joining us tonight. I appreciate your interest and your willingness to give us some time. As Kelly mentioned, this webinar is being sponsored by Fresh Coast Guardians and Milwaukee Metro Sewage District. Their goal is to help all of us work together to create better quality water, reduce pollution, keep water where it falls. If we keep it on our landscape, our plants benefit, less runoff in the storm sewers. Thanks to Kelly and her team at Milwaukee Public Library for hosting the event. As she mentioned, she will be sending you information on the recording, and this one and other past webinars are available on their YouTube channel, and you can always link through my website, melindamyers.com. So let's talk about selecting plants. This is probably, in addition to preparing this, picking the right location, preparing the soil, all very important, making sure you use the right plants. They need to be plants that tolerate flooding and drought once established, because the last thing you want to do is be watering your rain garden during hot, dry weather. And you know, that always seems to happen, or watching them die when we have really wet, soggy soil. Now, you're going to do a lot of soil prep to make it more conducive to quality growth, improve the drainage in clay soil and moisture holding ability in sandy soils. But we're going to pick plants and place them where they're going to thrive. I know that some of you may not be from Wisconsin, and even if you are, in 2023, the USDA updated the plant hardiness zone map. Now, keep in mind, this is the average minimum winter temperature recorded over like a 20-year period. Now, that said, think about some of the highs and lows. Here in Wisconsin, we've had 55 degrees followed by below zero. We've had just crazy fluctuating temperatures. And so that's really challenging on our plants as well. And I encourage everyone to start making lists about which plants are thriving in the crazy weather we're all experiencing. But hardiness is one factor to consider. And so this is just an up close look at Wisconsin for those of you here. Those of you along the lake are now a zone 6A, but I used to live on 16th Street in Milwaukee, and I know I could grow things I can't now that I'm further from the lake. So it's all about finding those microclimates and plants that are hardy to the average minimum winter temperatures. Also, we want to look at the sunshade conditions in your yard. You want to evaluate them throughout the day and you want to evaluate them throughout the year because you know they change. If you go to work every day and you're gone, you leave early and you come home late, that area that looks shady may have gotten a lot of sunlight during the day, or vice versa. That area with a little bit of late afternoon sun may have been in the shade all day. So you want to monitor that so you can see how much sunlight your plants are going to receive. Full sun plants need 6 to 8 hours of direct sunlight. So those are those bright sunny areas that may be a few hours in the morning and a few hours in the afternoon, but a total of 6 to 8 hours. Part shade plants prefer 3 to 5 hours of direct sunlight. Now keep in mind, a half a day of west facing sun is pretty intense. So even full sun loving plants can often grow in those areas that only receive a half a day of sunlight, but it's from the west. East sunlight's less intense and perfect for those part shade plants. Shade plants, shady areas these are plants that need 3 hours of direct sunlight. So they're getting maybe just early morning or afternoon sunlight, late afternoon, or maybe possibly in the middle of the day, which can be pretty tough and bright. So keep that in mind as you're selecting. Soils, and this was a display I saw in Utah at a GardenCom conference, and I just thought it explained it better than I can. And if you garden, have clay soil, you can relate to the one on the left. That water drains very slowly. Loamy soils have an equal mix of sand, fine particles, clay, sand, large particles, I'm sorry, clay, fine particles, and silt, and they mix together to make a moist, well-drained conditions. And then sand, as you see, it drains quickly because those big particles don't hold water and nutrients. When you're selecting plants, keep in mind the other value besides keeping water where it falls and managing all that stormwater on your property. What about the birds and pollinators? Most of the plants, really about all the plants we are going to talk about tonight, have bird and or pollinator appeal, and many are host plants for caterpillars that turn into beautiful butterflies. So keep that in mind as you're selecting the plants. And think year round, especially those of us in the Midwest and the North. Having beauty in the fall and winter looks a lot like this. I took a couple pictures of my garden this afternoon just because it's all seed heads and things that add some interest to the gray weather and the snow is melted. And for me, that provides interest and food for lots of the birds as well. Now, I'm going to talk about some sedges. We don't really have any grasses in this case for the rain garden, or I'm sorry, take that back. We have a couple of grasses too. So grasses and sedges provide unity. They provide a way of pulling that together. They fill in those spaces and make a nice backdrop. They provide support for some of your plants that may tend to flop without those sturdy nearby neighbors. So use grasses and sedges kind of throughout to create kind of ribbons of texture and hold that whole garden together. On each slide, you'll see these reference to different benefits. Is it a part sun, shade loving plant, or maybe it takes all three? Does it provide food and shelter for birds, attract hummingbirds, butterflies, and then other pollinators like the bees? Makes it easier for me when I talk about it and you to remember. Prairie smoke is one of my favorite. I use this as an edging plant with cultivated as well as native plants. It'd be great is an edge garden. It takes wet and dry soil, so it'd be great as an edger in your rain garden. The foliage stays all season long, and you can see the flowers are kind of downturned, dark pink. And then what gives it that common name is those seed heads that look like smoke. It persists. I've had to divide mine and probably every 5 years. It's a clump big enough to dig and divide and take a chunk somewhere else. But it's an early spring bloomer, adds lots of value to the garden, good low grower. If you've grown Coreopsis, you know they really like it dry, well-drained soil. When we see mesic, it means areas that usually get moisture, sufficient moisture throughout. And mesic dry means it'll take it dry as well as, some occasional moist but well-drained soils. This is long blooming. It will reseed readily, supports pollinators and butterflies, and the birds eat the seeds. And it's just one of those plants. Yellow just really brightens up the landscape, and it's a nice medium-sized plant. Harebell, one of the cool things about harebell, it's a summer bloomer. And look at the basal leaves are so low, so it really looks very magical as those bell-shaped flowers hang from those nice narrow stems. I just noticed we have a guest. I'm going to call you out, Jay, who runs the Rain Garden program. So I'm hoping that he's going to be able to kind of answer some questions as well, share some insight. So chime in anytime. We appreciate your presence here, Jay. And a lot of you may have met him over the years as well. He's with Fresh Coast Guardians and MMSD. So take a look at the harebells. Very nice and delicate. And most gardeners are looking for blue flowers as well. Purple prairie cone clover is one of my favorite. Look at those unique thimble-like flowers. It's a great bumblebee plant. It's a legume, so it's good at fixing nitrogen and has a tap root. So it really is very drought tolerant. Put it where you want to keep it because you're not going to be able to divide it and move it readily. You can, but it can be a little tricky. I do want to remind you on the handout, and Kelly provided the link in the chat. There's a lot of detail, this information and more in the handout, so you have that reference as you're ordering your plants for the plant sale. Purple lovegrass. Now, this is one that I have growing in my garden. I have it with some cultivated plants in one bed and some native plants in another. And I have to tell you, in the spring, when the leaves come up, it's kind of like, oh, why do I have this plant? It's kind of it looks almost like a clump of quackgrass. However, once the blooms come in and they really last from July through September, look at that nice soft texture. So you've got those grass blades kind of in a mound. It's a clumper, so it's not aggressive, very tolerant of dry soil. So it'd be good on the edges of your rain barrel that tend, or rain garden, sorry, on the edge of your rain garden that tend to dry out quicker. Those plants that love the moisture, those we're going to put towards the center where the water drains, collects, and is slower to drain. Wild petunia, beautiful. The picture doesn't do it justice. Periwinkle blue flowers to lavender. It blooms all summer long, 1 to 2 feet tall. Now, I have to tell you, it will grow and spread, so it makes a great ground cover. As you can see, excellent for the edge of your rain garden because it tolerates dry, or on the sides as well, the slopes because of its height. Pollinators and hummingbirds love this. Now, I planted this in my small city lot, and because I saw the flowers, like, oh, this is great, planted it, and it kind of took over. It was a small bed, so I needed to do some weeding. I repurchased it with a different name. That's why using the botanical name is always important. I repurchased it, planted it, went, oh, okay, I just started containing that first planting. But I'll tell you, it's worth it. And it's one that can weave around some of your larger plants, so can almost make sort of a living mulch for you. Sweetgrass. I picked up some plants at a garden center to buy, and I read the tag and it said very aggressive, and I put them back. And then I read the book Braiding Sweetgrass and decided, you know what, the fragrant foliage, that the history of this plant, look at those beautiful seed heads too that mature in the fall. Just add that nice texture and color to the garden. And so I did buy some new plants and added them. So this is just one to keep an eye on that you may want to dig and divide as it gets a little too big for the location and maybe start another rain garden. And it takes the wet soil so great in those lower parts of the rain garden. Sky blue aster is a good choice. Some asters can reseed readily and kind of be a little bit aggressive, but this one really is a good choice for smaller areas, not aggressive. 2 to 3 feet tall, late summer bloomer. And one of the benefits of asters, just like goldenrod, is they provide nectar and pollen for bees and other pollinators that need to fuel up before winter. So those late visitors to the garden. And leave the seeds on this one because the birds will come and feast on the seeds all winter long. And I don't know about you, but the birds visiting my garden is really a plus for me. They add motion and color, especially in the winter when maybe there's not as much bright color happening in the landscape. Butterfly weed. Now, we all want to take care of the monarchs, and common milkweed is their favorite. However, butterfly weed works great as well. Dawn, who works with me, sent me a picture one day last year in early summer, and she had 30 monarch caterpillars on her butterfly weed. I went out and looked at my common milkweed and I couldn't find 30. And she's in the city of Milwaukee too. So, what I like about this, it's a clumper. It doesn't spread as aggressively as common milkweed. It needs well-drained soils. When I was in Milwaukee, I had great soil I had amended, and mine did okay. But now I'm gardening in sandy soil. Boy, I can tell the difference. These are late to emerge, so you want to mark their location in spring. Either a plant tag, leave them stand, and don't be anxious to cut them back until you start seeing signs of new growth. The orange flowers combine nicely with purples and blues and yellows. It's a smaller scale clumper. The monarchs love it. So do other butterflies, hummingbirds, and bees will nectar on the blooms. Phytosgrama is another good plant for small rain gardens. It does spread by rhizomes, but it's more of a clumper, and so it can easily be managed. It doesn't get too out of control. Look at the seed heads on that. They hang from that upright stem, adding to that interest in that texture. Great for moist, well-drained to dry soil conditions. So this is another good one if you're looking for a grass for smaller spaces. Rough Blazing Star is another good one. It's beautiful. It's it's full sun, it's drought tolerant, so it really likes it dry. Late season bloomer, and I'll tell you, the butterflies, even hummingbirds, will nectar on this, then leave the seed heads are kind of fluffy, and the birds will come and pick those seeds. We'll reseed a bit. When I was growing this in the city, I had only planted a few plants and had lots of them I could share. And so it may be one of those things you may want to remove some of the seed heads if it's spreading too much, but then you're missing out on some of the birds visiting. It's kind of a toss up. Showy black-eyed Susan. This is another wonderful one. It does not get the leaf spot disease. If you've grown some of the cultivars like Goldstrom, you know that they really look ugly by the end of the year. They have several leaf spots that attack. Doesn't kill the plant, but they look ugly. Showy black-eyed Susan is not susceptible to the septoria leaf spot that's really taken its toll on many of our other rudbeckias. This one is another one that reseeds readily. It can take it wet to dry conditions. It's got beautiful, clean foliage, bright yellow flowers. I have to tell you, when I had my garden in the city and I was on 16th Street in the small city lot, and I had lots of cool, I thought, neat, unique plants. Everybody loved the Rudbeckia. They'd go, "What is that plant?" So this is definitely a star of the garden. Excuse me. And this is perfect for a rain garden because it's suitable to those wet and dry conditions that your rain garden experiences. Hoary vervain. Now we're going to talk about two different vervains tonight. Hoary vervain is the one that likes it dry. So this is one that I grow in my sandy soil. What I like about both of the vervains is they're upright, they're beautiful blue to lavender flowers, and they're clumpers. So this is another one perfect for a small landscape because it tends to spread as a clump, but it doesn't take over the garden. You can see the bumblebees love this as well as all the other pollinators and hummingbirds as well. Blue false indigo. This is one of my favorites. It's a native plant. It is big. That size is no exaggeration. Make sure you keep that in mind as you find a spot. I'm notorious for underestimating my plants, and I've had to move a few. These are hard to move because they have a tap root, but I've done it successfully, but you really don't want to have to do it. So give them room, 3 to 5 feet tall and wide. They bloom early in the season, followed by black seed pods, which, if you leave them stand for the winter, they rattle in the wind. It just adds that element of sound. The foliage is kind of a bluish green. And again, this is a legume, so it fixes nitrogen to help add nitrogen to the soil and doesn't need a lot of fertilization. Moist, well-drained soils, it's tolerating my sandy soil quite well, and I tend to be a low waterer, but it will take it, prefers moist, well-drained. So this is one of, I think, our outstanding native plants. Showy milkweed. This is one that goes quickly, so order fast. Showy milkweed has the same monarch appeal that common milkweed does, but it's less aggressive. And so it's one that you may need to do a little seed control, but it tends to be less aggressive than common milkweed. 3 to 4 feet, blooms for a long period in the summer. Look at those unique flowers. Aren't they gorgeous? And has the same pollinator and hummingbird appeal as other milkweeds. Swamp milkweed is and sometimes called red milkweed. I think a lot of the people selling it feel like swamp milkweed isn't a good marketing tool. But a couple reasons I like this plant. One, great monarch appeal. Two, it's a clumper. It doesn't spread readily. Some people say they get seedlings, unwanted seedlings, but nothing like common milkweed. It takes it wet and even will take it dry once established. Again, making this a perfect rain garden plant. It is big, so this is one you're going to want to put where you can enjoy the height of it, but not overshadow your other plants. Again, you'll have butterflies, bees, and hummingbirds nectaring on the flowers. Fragrant pink flowers, just like the common milkweed. Narrower foliage, and again, not as aggressive. So it makes a good choice for smaller landscapes. Pale purple coneflower blooms before our purple coneflower. And so that kind of extends that whole view of coneflowers in the garden. It's a little more adaptable than purple coneflower. You know, it'll take it a little bit drier and it'll tolerate moist, well-drained soils. Those narrow petals that cascade down give it a kind of a interesting appearance as well. So this is another one, another tall one that you can use in those areas that can be moist throughout the season to dry. Meadow blazing star, you may have heard that this is one of the best monarch butterfly nectaring plants. You know, they love the milkweeds. That's where they lay their eggs, and they'll nectar on the milkweed flowers, but they love these flowers as well. This is a summer-long bloomer, liatris, tall, vertical in the garden, so use that to your advantage. They make great cut flowers if you can spare a few for the pollinators. The birds will feed on the seeds as well. And so it's got lots of appeal. It will reseed just like the others. Again, usually easy to dig, move, and control. So it's not too out of control, but this is one that's sure to help bring those monarchs to your landscape. Now, stiff goldenrod, look at the beautiful foliage, the nice cluster of flowers, mid to late summer into fall bloomer. Again, it's one of those plants, the goldenrods like the asters blooming late in the season provide that needed nectar and pollen for bees and butterflies. And the birds love the seeds. Now, this one does reseed readily, so you may want to sacrifice a few of the seed heads to kind of contain it or be prepared to do a little bit of thinning in the spring. Again, a great way to end. Combine this with a purple aster, and you've got almost like a Monet planting. It's great. Early sunflower, Heliopsis. This is one that stands up good and tall. That's a plus. It blooms for a long period of time. It takes it wet, it takes it dry. Again, making it the perfect rain garden plant. It does reseed readily, especially if there's open space and good growing conditions. We had one at the State Fair Park where I speak every year at the Wisconsin State Fair, and it took control of the garden. So this is one that you want to enjoy. Keep an eye out if you've got a small space, or as you can see here, it's with bee balm, and those are perfect partners because they're equally aggressive. So if you have space, this is a good option. If space is limited, just keep an eye out and remove seedlings in areas you don't want it. This is the other vervain that I mentioned, the hoary vervain that liked it dry. Blue vervain likes it moist. So this is a great one for the wetter parts of your rain garden or those wetter areas in your yard. Like the others, it's an upright plant. This one's a little taller. It's a clumper, so it's another good one for small spaces, though you can use it in large areas too. Just plant a few more. So we're moving into plants that take some shade. Wild strawberry. I've even grown this in heavier shade, but then you don't get the flowers and fruit. Wild strawberry makes a great ground cover. I often mix this with other perennials, so I have kind of a double layer. One of the new movements is doing what's called living mulches. So instead of mulching your soil, having plants that have a cover the ground don't outcompete with your larger plants to provide that mulch by shading out the weeds, outcompeting the weeds, and holding in the moisture. This is great for wet to dry areas. It flowers. There's fruit you can eat. The birds will, if you can beat the birds. A couple other reasons I like this as a ground cover. Besides its adaptability to light conditions and to soil moisture, you've got yellow or white flowers in the spring. You've got beautiful leaves all summer, fruit, pretty fruit that's edible, and red fall color. So you've got seasonal interest, which is a real plus in the landscape. Nodding peak onion. I've got this growing in a few gardens, and trust me, it does reseed readily. So this is another one that's a great filler. That fine foliage is excellent. It will take it wet, it will take it dry. It's very adaptable. Just be prepared that you may need to be doing some thinning of the seedlings in the spring, or you may consider after it's done blooming and the pollinators have taken advantage of the flowers, before it sets seeds and drop them, just go out and deadhead, remove those faded flowers, and that will reduce the reseeding and be a lot easier to manage it in the spring. Downy woodmint is another nice plant. It's kind of, if you look at this, you probably think of it, it looks a lot like um, bee balm. This one is not real aggressive, so it's a good option. It does kind of reseed a little bit, but it spreads slowly by rhizome, so not as aggressive as bee balm that reseeds readily. So this spreads by rhizome, forming clumps. And again, if it gets too big, you can divide this easily to keep it the size you need. Blooms early in the season, early to midsummer. So you get these wonderful flowers that the pollinators love, and it takes full to part sun. So that gives it you a little more flexibility on location. Wild lupine. In Wisconsin, lupine's native to central and northern Wisconsin, rocky, fast draining soils. I found when I was growing lupine in the city of Milwaukee in my heavier soils, it did okay. But if we had a hot spring and summer, I didn't get as many blooms. It really likes it cool, and thus it's a May, June flowering plant. So we kind of hope for a little cooler May for better blooms. But boy, look at the leaves. Those are beautiful. The blue flowers, those spikes of blue flowers are great. Wonderful plant. It's worth adding to your landscape and keep your fingers crossed for the right weather for the blooms. Common yarrow, you will see this listed in perennial books, in wildflower books, and in weed books. It reseeds readily, and so it can be kind of aggressive in the garden. Has great pollinator appeal. It's got great drought tolerance. So if you've got an area that's hot and dry, this is a great plant to grow. Keep an eye on it, and you may want to just remove the faded flowers to minimize reseeding. Fine ferny foliage, so that adds some nice texture to the garden. So planting it with equally assertive plants is one way to manage, or again, keeping an eye out, thinning out those seedlings come spring. Brown fox sedge. One of the reasons I like this, you'll see prairie drop seed in a few minutes, but one of the reasons I like brown fox sedge is it reminds me of prairie drop seed. Fine foliage, as it matures, it can kind of have that growth habit of, say, fountain grass or prairie drop seed. Now, it does spread aggressively, so that you want to keep an eye on it. This is one that you're just going to have to dig and divide every few years to keep it under control. It's, again, an early season bloomer. Now, some people don't find sedges, their flowers, appealing. I think they're interesting. They're not those showy black-eyed Susan blooms, but I think they have some interesting kind of funky geometric shapes or texture. This will take it moist to dry soils. Black-eyed Susan. This is a biennial, but it reseeds readily, so you almost think you have a perennial. So this is one that's often included in wildflower mixes, gives you a big show, and if it doesn't have room to reseed, you get once and done. So the first year you get leaves. Now the transplants you get at the plant sale or buy at the garden center will usually bloom that first summer because it's in their second year. So they flower, set seed, the plant dies, but they've dropped seed to the ground and so they continue. So you feel like you have a perennial. They really act like that. Long blooming, beautiful yellow flowers with a tinge of, you can see orange here, great pollinator peel, and birds love the seeds. Great blue lobelia. We're going to talk about cardinal flower in a minute, another lobelia. I find this one a lot easier to grow. So if you haven't succeeded with cardinal flower, don't give up. But you may want to try the great blue lobelia. It has great hummingbird appeal and pollinator appeal. It does tend to colonize, but not overly aggressive. So it's kind of easy to manage. It's got these beautiful blue flowers, usually mid to late summer. So a nice time when a lot of things are fading. You know, the early bloomers are done. We're moving into summer, into fall. Nice vertical accent, tall plants, full to part sun. Lead plant is a shrub. This has great foliage, beautiful flowers. Don't prune it back for a couple of years. It takes a couple of years for it to reach maturity and flower for you. So don't give up. You know, sometimes we're used to those plants that are going to bloom right away. So don't give up. You want to make sure that you let that get established. Nice leaves even before it blooms. So it grows a couple feet tall. It is deeply rooted and it is very drought tolerant once established. New Jersey tea. This is a great shrub, even for semi-formal areas, not just for rain gardens. The first time I saw this was in Nicolet National Forest, so it takes some pretty good shade. And if you think about soil conditions in the forest, all that competition from the tree roots, it takes dry soil. Yeah, it likes moisture when needed. Hopefully we get that consistent rainfall, but once established, it will tolerate dry soil. Fragrant blooms, and that helps with its pollinator appeal. Foxglove. Foxglove comes in early, gives you a couple months of bloom. Now, if you know penstemons, they tend to like well-drained to dry soils. This foxglove Penstemon digitalis, is more clay tolerant and moist soil tolerant. I do find it reseeds a bit, but I've grown it both in my garden in Milwaukee, my small space, and it was pretty well contained. And here in my more sandy soil, I'll find seedlings here and there, but nothing obnoxious. I just move them where I want them, so I get a few extra plants. It likes moist, well drained to dry soils, but it will tolerate that clay, which is a plus because many urban gardeners are dealing with clay soil. Mountain mint. Despite the name mountain mint, it's not as aggressive as some, and it's a wonderful plant. The botanical name references the cluster of flowers. This has some major pollinator appeal. Fine leaves, you can see the texture of the leaves, they're narrow. The flowers are very unique. So lots of the kind of clumps in the middle are the fertile flowers, and the bees are pollinating on those too. Takes wet soils, which makes it a great addition to the center of your rain garden and the areas that tend to stay wetter. 2 to 3 feet tall, a very unique texture, very nice to combine with some of your sedges, your grasses, or even your showier plants. Little blue stem. If you've grown little blue stem, you may have had problems with it flopping. In heavy soils, it will tolerate it, but it tends to flop. And so putting some plants like you see the coneflower here nearby that would help support it's a great idea. But boy, the fine texture, the blue-green leaves of this plant, the fall color is outstanding, and the seeds look like little tufts. So the birds will come in and they'll take those seeds in the winter. The pollinators will come and nectar. Many butterflies use this as a host plant for their caterpillars. So it's got lots of appeal. Full sun, part shade, well-drained soil for your best results to dry, but give them some support if your soil's heavy. I mentioned prairie drop seed before. This is one of my favorite native grasses. It goes so well in natural plantings and rain gardens and even semi-formal gardens. Look at the fine foliage. It forms that growth like fountain grass and ornamental grass. It flowers for you late in the summer, and the flowers smell like, I think, burnt popcorn, but coriander sounds so much better. And then when they turn into seed pods and are covered with ice, they look like little gems. Fall color. So you've got good hardiness, and all the hardiness zones are listed on the handout. Great hardiness. You've got nice foliage all season long, good fall color, flowers that are fragrant, and seeds that have ornamental appeal and feed the birds. Bluewood aster. Now, bluewood aster is one that will reseed readily, so you may want to deadhead some of those blooms. It does take some shade. Again, another late season bloomer, and it's good for your pollinators. I wanted to mention I've included all the botanical names on the handout and on the slide because common names, as you search for plants, you may find that not everybody calls this a bluewood aster, but they all use that botanical name. And so you may want to search that way. Asters were renamed, so now we're, Symphyotrichum is, you may still see it listed as Aster cordifolium. Some people are resisting updating the name, and I totally understand that. But using the botanical name will get you where you need to go. Lavender hyssop. This is from one of my garden beds, and I love this plant. Look at all of those silver spotted skippers. There's some bees on there. Hummingbirds visit this plant. I was taking video and pictures standing in this planting of lavender hyssop, and I was just surrounded by all these pollinators busy nectaring. They didn't care that I was there. Long bloomer, a good couple months of flower. Will reseed, but I don't find it obnoxious. And sometimes the parent plant may die out after a few years, so your seedlings will take over. Beautiful flowers. The leaves, when crushed, have a licorice anise fragrance. Wood mint. Wood mint's another one that it does tend to form a dense clump. So it's one that you want to keep after. It's 2 to 4 feet tall and it will take its wet. So that's a plus. It has those same kind of funky flowers as the hairy mint that we looked at before. But this one is, or the downy mint we looked at before, but this one tends to be a little more assertive in the garden. So you're going to want to keep an eye on it. It will be great if you have a lot of space and you want to cover it. This is a good option. Long blooming, great pollinator appeal. I mentioned cardinal flower earlier, and it likes full to part sun. I've seen it in fairly heavy shade, moist to wet soils. This is one that you either have a lot of success. I was teaching a seminar a month ago, and somebody said, "Oh, I've got so many seedlings, I can't find places for them all." But most of the people in the crowd were like, "Well, I can't keep mine alive." It is short-lived, meaning you'll get a couple years, but it will reseed if it's in the right conditions, and so you'll continue to have the plant. Don't give up. I once heard a woman who's paid to do garden design and maintenance say, she never gives up on a plant until she's killed it 3 times. She's getting paid for this. So I think you can kill it a few times till you find the right spot to put this plant. Often used in not only rain gardens, but beside ponds, in water features, even in moist but well-drained soils. So it's a beautiful plant. You can see that looks like palm sedge next to it, which is another one, and it looks like turtle head behind it. Wild bergamot, Monarda. bee balm. This is a native plant. It has great bee and butterfly and hummingbird appeal. It does reseed readily and will get bigger as a clump. It has wonderful minty, citrusy, fragrant leaves. So I always say you're doing a little aromatherapy as you're thinning it out in the spring. So if it's starting to take up more space than you would prefer, you may want to do a little thinning in the spring, remove some of those seedlings so that it's not taking over the garden. Or if you have more space, then team it up with plants that are equally aggressive. And, when you look at a prairie, you see clumps of bee balm, clumps of Rudbeckia, clumps of New England aster. And that can eventually happen if you've got the room for it. If you're dealing with an urban or suburban lot, you may have to help kind of manage that to develop those. This will take it wet to dry. Powdery mildew is less of an option in full sun conditions, and especially if it has sufficient moisture. Purple coneflower, I mentioned it blooms later than the pale purple coneflower. It takes shade better than the pale purple coneflower. It will take dry soil once it's established, but really prefers moist to wet, well-drained soil conditions. Birds love these seeds. You can see the butterfly nectaring on it as well as bees and butterflies. I think the seed heads are attractive in the garden over winter and bring in those songbirds as well. Long blooming. If they tend to be floppy, you can cut them back early in the season. That delays flowering by a couple weeks, but it keeps them a little more compact. Some people will prune half, but not all, so they extend the bloom time on their cone flowers. Plains oval sedge. This is another good one for smaller areas. Look at those funky seed heads, and they'll turn tan in the fall, adding an ornamental appeal. They'll take it wet, they'll take it dry. They take full sun to full shade. This is a versatile plant. So if you've got areas that are very challenging, consider this. Sedges are grass-like plants, they're not true grasses, so it has that grass-like foliage, but these really funky seed heads. Wild geranium. It is a true geranium, not to be confused with the annuals you may grow in pots in the garden. But this is a wonderful early bloomer. If it has sufficient moisture, the leaves will really, in a little bit of shade, it really prefers some part shade to full shade. The leaves will look good all season long. Too much sun, or if it does get too dry, you may have some scorching on the leaves. These will grow and spread and create a nice mass in the garden. Wild columbine. Um, this is a favorite of hummingbirds. I always watch for the hummingbirds and the butterflies and bees on my planting of columbine. It does reseed readily, so you need to be prepared. It'll take full sun, it'll take heavy shade. Heavy shade, you may not get as many blooms, but you'll get some. And so this is a great adaptable plant. It will take it dry once established, moist, well drained to dry soils. If you end up with too many seedlings, you may want to remove the seed pods before they open or as those flowers fade. When the pollinators and the hummingbirds are done and moved on to something in bloom, you can cut that plant back, get rid of those faded flowers so you reduce the amount of seedlings, or let them take over and fill in a void in the garden. Big leaf aster is another good one for small garden lots. It's very shade tolerant, part to full shade. So that's a real plus for this because we don't think of asters as being tolerant of low light conditions. A little bit on the shorter side. And again, it's a fall bloomer, sometimes even into October. So it'll take it wet to dry soil conditions. Perfect for your rain garden, especially one with a little bit of shade. Heartleaf golden Alexander. This is another plant that's very adaptable to sunlight. Full sun, full shade. It takes wet conditions, it takes dry conditions. Look at those big leaves. So those are very impressive, adding bold texture. Yellow flowers really jump out. And in May, we're really looking for some bright colors. So this is a nice addition as well. And this can go in those areas really about anywhere in your rain garden. Long-beaked sedge is another good one. And that's a great one that's got nice texture, part to full shade. So this is another good one. It's a little bit on the taller side, wet to dry soil conditions. So this is another one that will be very adaptable that can be used in a wide range of areas of your rain garden. Mist flower. When I think of mist flower, I grew up in Ohio and I have an uncle with a farm in southern Ohio, and we were out on his property in August one year, and boy, the field was covered with these. They remind me of ageratums, if you know floss flower ageratum, different group of plant, but has that same pretty flower. It does reseed readily, so it really likes a large area to thrive, or it's just one to keep an eye on and dig and divide it as needed. Very tolerant to wet and dry conditions, and a summer into fall bloomer. Zigzag goldenrod. So both the goldenrods that we've talked about can be a little aggressive. So you want to keep an eye on them, either by removing the faded flowers to reduce the seeds. And that way, you don't have that problem with so many seedlings forming. This is a summer into fall bloomer. Again, great for those late season pollinators. A little bit tall, nice and vertical. And the stems, the flowers, if you look at the flowers, are kind of zigzag on that stem. And that's what gave it that common name, zigzag goldenrod. Tall anemone. This is one that will fill a space quickly. So you want to use this where you either need to crowd out some other plants or you're willing to keep an eye on them. They're beautiful and they're long bloomers all summer long. Those beautiful white flowers really brighten up the landscape. 2 to 3 feet tall. So they've got some good size on them, and they'll take it dry. So a great one for those dry spots. Even those moist ones that don't stay wet too long, it will thrive there. Just keep an eye on it to keep it somewhat contained. Virginia wild rye is another one that reseeds readily. So it's got a very coarse texture, so a very different look than some of the sedges that we looked at or the grasses we looked at. But look at those seed heads; those are pretty attractive, and you can see why it's called wild rye because they look like rye. It looks like rye. Wet to moist, well-drained soils. Blooms in the summer. Seed heads form late summer. It's a tall plant. And this is another one. Just keep an eye on it and you may be dividing it more frequently to keep it contained. I just wanted to end with a few combinations just to kind of inspire you as you're thinking about how to put your plants together. What I like to do is when I do make my order of plants or bring them home, I kind of go, okay, I want something in spring, summer, and fall blooming. Look at the height that you may be able to organize your plants that way to help you so that parts of it are blooming in the spring, or if you want one section to bloom in the spring, where the tall ones go so you're not blocking the short ones. But here are a few things. Look at the liatris, the spike-like plants. Look at that vertical interest. Look at the fine foliage. You recognize the purple coneflower and the rudbeckia. They've all been allowed to intermingle, which is really kind of what creates this great community. Um, this is my friend Stacy and Ken's garden. And this is their one cardinal flower that comes back every year, or the seedlings come back. It doesn't spread, it doesn't go, but they look for it every year. But that little bright beacon of red amongst the bee balm, the purple, and the cardinal flower you see, the wild bergamot or bee balm, and the gray-headed cone flower is the one kind of tilting to the right. You'll see the Heliopsis here, the early sunflower, the gray-headed coneflower. That's the one with the kind of pointy cone, and sometimes called Mexican sombrero, and wild bergamot. Look at the difference in the texture that pale purple coneflower provides. You can see the penstemon still blooming in the back. This is Lurie Gardens in Chicago. If you get to Chicago, go to Millennium Park and visit Lurie Gardens. It's a small garden with a combination of native and cultivated plants. It's very inspiring and beautiful. Pale purple or pale coneflower is there somewhere. Purple coneflower, sorry, lavender hyssop, and then goldenrod. That happens to be fireworks goldenrod. But look at the texture, and I apologize, that's purple coneflower. Look at the different color combinations in the texture. I love blues and yellows. They really, that contrasting color grabs your attention. That's why orange butterfly weed looks so good with purple flowers. Here, speaking of butterfly weed, here's some butterfly weed, purple coneflower. We got pale purple coneflower in the back and common milkweed. I mean, common milkweed is great. The flowers are fragrant, but boy, it's really aggressive. The rhizomes are deep. And so you have some, I think, some good options to support the monarchs with the ones here that we've covered tonight. Rattlesnake Master, not on the plant sale list here in Milwaukee, but look at that. It's got yucca-like leaves. Yuccafolium is its specific species epithet name. Those round flowers that have great pollinator appeal. Nice contrast to the butterfly weed in front. Baptisia, which is the false blue indigo with wild columbine. That's such a pretty combination. And this is Dawn's garden. She's kind of allowed the columbine to grow in amongst the Baptisia. And she's got a city lot in Milwaukee, just like many of you. Again, we've got Hoary vervain. That's that upright purple plant with coneflower and black-eyed Susan are on the left too, and then liatris as well. The nodding onion, you can see that it's kind of nodding and kind of making a nice big clump. You can see the rattlesnake master to the right, some liatris in the front. Pale purple coneflower. World milkweed is in the front. Look at the fine foliage on that world milkweed. It's kind of a later bloomer in the late bloomer in the season, but it's got some nice texture to it as well. Prairie drop seed. This is, look at the texture that provides. This is a great plant to use throughout the garden to help unify, to provide some balance, support maybe some plants that are a little floppy. Cup plant is the plant with the big leaves in the middle. It's very aggressive. It's a great plant. I have a spot that I have some canary reedgrass, and I've been reading this will outcompete canary reedgrass, and I have room for it where I live now. It's a cool plant, but it is very aggressive. Water collects where the leaves connect to the stem, and birds will sip the water out of it, thus cup plant. But in this garden, it works, right? Because they've got black-eyed Susan, they've got Heliopsis, they've got bee balm, plants that are equally assertive. So they're really playing nicely together. For quicker results, we all want instant results, right? And so when you buy a small transplant, it's going to take a while for it to get its roots established, which is what we want, and then reach maturity and start flowering. So it just takes a little more patience. Starting with bigger plants, you get quicker results. This was a garden. You can see I bought a lot of some 6-inch pots, some gallon-sized containers for my garden bed here. This was my no maintenance garden ode to Roy Diblick and my son-in-law helping me plant. As he said, how many plants did you buy? There were quite a few. But so this was in October 2019. This was 2 years later in the summer. And look at how full that is. So just in 2 years. And I've got some open spaces that I need to deal with yet because Crown Vetch has moved in. But look at how full this is and how many blooms there are in this garden. In the fall, I love all the texture that provides and the different subtle colors in the garden. Maybe if you want some instant color, and I know we all want, I got a garden, I got a short season, I want color. Well, look for plants, if you're going with annuals, that are suited to the conditions in the rain garden, the sunlight or shade, and more importantly, the moisture level. This is a zinnia. Zinnias take it dry. That would be great on the sides and the edges of your rain garden where it tends to dry out quickly. Other drought tolerant plants, celosia or coxcomb, they take it hot, dry conditions. They like it full sun and do well in those conditions. If you've got moist or wet areas, spider cleome, this is a big one. There are some cultivars that are only about 3 feet tall, but the species can be quite big, 4 feet tall and up to 3 feet wide. It's a great filler, temporary filler. It's an annual. It does reseed. See how those long little seed pods? but I find it easy to manage. Some people find it annoying. It does smell at night, has a musky smell to it, but it tolerates the wet soils. Um, Coming up in on March 27th, I'm going to do a rain garden Q&A. You can submit your questions to info@melindamyers.com, or if you have some here we don't get answered, I'll make sure that we add that to our list. And it's a chance for us to answer those questions. If you're hesitant or I haven't answered your questions, we're not doing the planting a rain garden, but we have past videos available, how to plan your rain garden. But I'm happy to answer a variety of questions to help you maybe get over any anxiety, or if you've got a garden, to get over maybe some of those challenges. The next webinar in this series is Reinvigorate Your Rain Garden. So I talked about some of those plants that tend to be a little on the assertive side, or maybe aren't doing well, or maybe the weeds have moved in. So we're going to talk about what you can do to kind of get your rain garden in shape for the growing season and for years to come. And then in May, we'll talk about 7 steps to manage water on your property. Rain gardens are one thing, rain barrels, amending your soil, planting trees if you have room. We'll talk about a variety of strategies. Then you can kind of pick and choose and pick the ones that work best for your situation. If you are in the Milwaukee Metro Sewage District's service area, they have a great opportunity for you. They have a wonderful variety of plants. We've talked about most of them here tonight, available at a discounted price because they want you to establish and care for a rain garden to help keep water where it falls. And so you want to order early. And that's one reason we wanted to have this webinar early in the season so you can place your order soon rather than later. The sale closes April 3rd or when they run out of plants. And I'd recommend you place your order soon. You can see what you'll do is you'll come and you'll pick up your plants at MMSD headquarters. Volunteers will help load up your car. It's such a great opportunity. Look at the quality of those plants. Great quality, good price, and it's a great way to help support your efforts. I have other webinars coming up. Visit my website, melindamyers.com. And please, I hope you'll join me. And I've once again teamed up with the Wisconsin Public Libraries, so the libraries of the UP. And thanks to sponsorship by We Energies, we're providing webinars, videos, and activities April, May, and June. You don't have to live in Wisconsin or the UP of Michigan to take advantage, but those libraries are doing extra projects and having book lists and things to help support the projects we're doing. We want to help you create your own outdoor paradise. And I always like to end my talks by asking you to help me grow gardeners. This was my grandson, Sammy, a few years ago. He helped me dig a dry riverbed. You could see my downspout from the garage. The water would run off. I have sandy soil, so it drained well. But if we had a lot of rain, it would go on the sidewalk. In the winter, it'd freeze. So he and I dug out a trench, lined it with landscape fabric, filled it with stone, directed the downspout to that area, and it solved my problem. I have something to capture and break up the force of the water as well. Anyway, help inspire. I got off on the subject. Inspire somebody new to start gardening. You found the benefit, help them find that as well. And please stay connected. I want to thank Fresh Coast Guardians and MMSD for sponsoring this webinar. And I'm going to invite, and I'm sorry to put you on the spot, Jay, but if you'd like to say anything in addition to asking people to help, we'd love to hear from you. I think you're muted, so I don't know if Kelly needs to unmute you. And now I'm glad to answer questions. So Jay joined us on audio. So thanks, Jay. Sorry, we kind of got a sneak peek. But anything you want to add about Fresh Coast Guardians or the plant sale or anything I've forgotten to mention, because this is what you do every day.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can now.
Okay,
Thank you.
great. Yeah, great. And I thought I added, or maybe I'm not available on video. But
Well,
that's
you were,
less
and then you
important.
weren't. So I don't know.
Oh, can you see me here now? I don't
No,
know.
I did for a while. It was kind of like I thought you were blocking our view.
Yeah. Well, that's less important.
Okay.
Um, You can hear him.
You'll recognize his voice when you hear him speak, and then put the lovely face with that voice.
Yeah, just imagine. No, so I no, I think you did a great job, Melinda, and I think the emphasis on some of the smaller lots is important to understand, but I think that some of this, for some who are joining and maybe new to this, it can feel overwhelming.
Good
And
point.
I think, well, I mean, we have a lot of plants for sale and all those things, and that's why we do provide the kits. If you're not sure what you want to do, like the kits kind of the rain garden kits kind of help you, just experiment. I think that's part of what Melinda sort of hinted at is that like everybody on this call has a different microclimate on their property. And you might, get some plants and they don't do well, and you might get some plants that do amazingly well. And I think through that, like part of what was interesting about this is that it's something, later in life you don't learn as much. I feel like you're a kid, you're growing up, you're learning all every day. But as an adult, sometimes you kind of just go through the motions. And I think what's great about this is that not only is it great for the environment, but it's also great for you to be learning something new and experimenting with your own microclimate on your property. And if something's doing really well, okay, well maybe like, foster that plant and like, keep buying more of them or spreading it. And then if another plant's not doing well, don't keep trying, something that's not working. But maybe try something different the next year. And that's what I think the plant sale is great, is that, each plant is around $3. Is if you don't have success, you only, you know, spent about half a dozen price of eggs. So it's not a big deal, and you can experiment. I think essentially this is you're dipping your toe into something new if you're new to this, and it's exciting. It's a lot better than a turf grass lawn, which does pretty much nothing for the ecosystem, and definitely not much for soaking up water in your property. Um, and so I'm glad that you all joined, and I'm really happy, to be part of this and that Melinda supported all this tonight.
And Jay,
But
thank you. Oh,
yeah, don't
I
feel
was gonna,
overwhelmed. I guess my point is overall, don't feel overwhelmed. Dip your toe in, and if you do feel overwhelmed, you can, connect with us. But I think like the benefits of soaking up stormwater is obviously why the Milwaukee Metro Sewage District is part of this. But the co-benefits of this, and Melinda's mentioned this, is the pollinators and the
right.
bees are essential to our survival. And the continued sort of aesthetic that we have in this country and around the world of turf grass and trees and the traditional landscape is not actually a real natural landscape. So if you are open to it, I encourage you to try some things.
And I'm glad you mentioned the kits, Jay. I forgot to mention that. And that is great because even as a plant person, it's like, oh, well, my problem is I want one of everything, or actually six of everything. But, it is like, oh, will this work? Will that work? So the kits, that's a great way to start out and get going. And we've all killed plants. One of the best definitions I heard of a green thumb was someone who's grown a lot of plants, killed quite a few. They just don't mention the ones that died. So, if you've killed a few plants, you're on your way to being a green thumb gardener. And a rain garden does, as Jay mentioned, all those wonderful things for the environment, but you get to enjoy the beauty as well of the pollinators visiting. It's exciting. The kids, when I was in the city, all the neighborhood kids would come in my garden because I had bugs, good bugs eating bad bugs, butterflies, things that they didn't see in other yards that didn't have such a diverse palette of plants. So you're going to just add some excitement that way too. And it's okay to not be 100% successful. It's gardening. Weather is involved, plant selection, soil. So yeah, thank you. That's great. Oh, now we can see you. Thank you, Jay. Do we want to take some questions? And Jay, chime in anytime you like on this too, please.
Thanks, everyone. So, a couple points before we get to questions. We are recording this, so you will be able to go back and rewatch the entire webinar. I know Jay mentioned, the importance of not feeling overwhelmed. The MPL YouTube page does have all of our past webinars from previous seasons. So, if you want to do a deep dive on more subtopics within the general rain garden and native landscaping topic, then feel free to check those out as well. So lots to learn. All right, so let's get into questions here. So please drop your questions in the Q&A and we'll have time to answer them. So our first one is from Kathy. Kathy is asking about rain garden plants that would be good for full shade.
That last group of plants that I talked about were the most shade tolerant. So the strawberry will take pretty heavy shade, even though it's a half shade. You just won't get as many flowers and fruit. Wild geranium likes part to full shade. Also, trying to think, the big leaf aster will take some heavy shade. Columbine will take heavy shade. A lot of your sedges will take some good shade as well. And I don't know if you have, so on the handout, I do talk about light requirements. They're divided by full sun, part sun, and shade. And so that could be a helpful resource too. And so those are some that come to mind right away for me. That Plains oval sedge takes full sun to full shade, wet to dry, so very tolerant as well. I'm kind of looking at my cheat sheet here too to get my memory going. Long beak sedge can be a little assertive, but it's a shade tolerant plant. But if you want some bloom, do the wild geranium, do the columbine. Those are really good options. The Zizia, which is Golden Alexander, that's a good one too.
Question for Jay. Faith is wondering if you can provide the link to the information related to the plant sale.
And it's in the handout as well,
good.
but
But I can bring the link.
that'd be great if you put it in
Thank
the
you,
chat,
Jay.
then it's handy for everybody. But if they forget, hopefully they hear our voice. It's also on your handout.
All right.
Yeah,
So,
they take advantage of that. Like Jay said, it's a
Mhm.
great way to experiment. So, and those plants are really nice.
Next question is from Karen. Karen wants to know, what is the best suggestion for keeping my taller flowers from falling over into the yard?
So a couple things. Some pruning. There's a great book, and so part of rain gardens is we want to keep them as low maintenance as possible. But especially if you have, I found when I lived in the city of Milwaukee, I had clay soil, but it was highly amended. So it was great, but it was very nutritious. We always joked about we don't know what they buried in the yard. And so a lot of my native plants tended to flop. And so a couple things you can do. There's a book called The Well-Tended Perennial Garden. I would just look at it as a reference. I'm sure they must have it at the library. But sometimes pruning early in the season, like cone flowers, like Heliopsis, cutting those back early in the season delays the bloom a bit, but it encourages more compact growth. And so some pruning can help you manage it. You may want to look at doing some decorative supports as well. I mean, just because it's a rain garden doesn't mean you can't add a little, whether it's twigs or stems, or maybe you've got some kind of obelisk, or you've got just kind of something that will help support them. I find some grasses, not little blue stem, but some of the sedges can help support, or some of your other shorter plants that have stiffer, sturdier stems might help provide support. But you may need to just either keep the taller plants away from the edge or give them that support, or do just a little early season pruning. I'm taking notes on things I want to talk about. Um, and we'll talk about pruning plants back early in the season to a little bit more detail.
And I'll just reiterate that that is something that is really helpful, especially in the city. And I've taken advice from this very webinar from a few years ago, and it completely works. I mean, I think essentially getting a good hedge trimmer and, sort of pretending like it's a hedge, it completely works.
And it's better to use your hedge pruner on your perennials than your hedges. So good use for that tool too.
Yeah. Well, and I think one thing that we found is in an area that's heavily trafficked, like say the sidewalk, I know there's some people
Mm.
have run into issues with this. You can just establish sort of a mow strip, which, you know, just an area where you mow one pass of your lawnmower to prevent people from getting annoyed with like the flowers flopping on their feet as they walk by, because some people really can't handle it.
When I was in the city, we did exactly that because we killed all our grass and we made gardens, and it made some people nervous. And so when you have just that strip of mowed grass, it shows intention. And so that's also another, that's great. You're right. It keeps it off the sidewalk. It helps your neighbors know, okay, they know what they're doing. So good. That's great advice.
Thank you both. So yeah, there's the link to the MMSD plant sale in the chat. And then I also put in a link to the library catalog if you're interested
Oh,
in the book that Melinda mentioned. We do have that in our system as well. So feel free to check that out. All right. So we've got our next question from Terry. Terry asks, do monarchs lay their eggs on whorled milkweed as frequent as common and other milkweeds? I'm not familiar with this type of milkweed. Is it an aggressive spreader? Thank you for your advice.
it will spread readily. Monarchs will lay their eggs on it. Common milkweed is the one the one they lay their eggs on most. Showy milkweed the next, but they do lay them on all milkweeds. They'll lay their eggs on them. It's been interesting, and I don't know what you're seeing, Jay. Last year was my best monarch year, and I have lots of common milkweed where I actually had like 10 or 12 that I brought in to raise and release just because I found them. But I don't know that it's as much. It's a later bloomer and fine foliage. Some places that I use as reference, Prairie Nursery. He's in Westfield, Wisconsin. He has an excellent website with good information, talks about the size of the plant, gives tips. This is good for an urban or suburban lot. Prairie Moon out of Minnesota also has good information on their website. Of course, Fresh Coast Guardians and MMSD on the plants from the plant sale. They have lots of good information on all the plants there as well. And then um, Neil DeBull wrote a book on prairie plants for the garden, and I'm getting this name wrong, and I should see if I can see it from here in the shelf. But and I know the library has it because I've asked. It's by Neil DeBull, DIBOLL, and he's got great charts. Now, some people found it, if you're new to gardening, you may want to just not check that out yet. But if you're really kind of feel like I want to know more, and he's got great charts, plants that are good for certain conditions, plants that are good for smaller lots, plants that are good, and he's got pictures of different stages. It's really a great reference, but it can be, I recommended it to somebody and they were a little overwhelmed. So check it out of the library before you buy it and see if that meets your needs. I mean, take it and hopefully, I know they had it somewhere.
Yeah, no, they just put Kelly, I think just put it in the
Oh, thank
with
you.
Hillary Cox, I think.
Perfect.
Yep.
Yeah, thank you.
That's relatively new as well, isn't it?
Yeah,
Or
I think it came out just last year or the year before. So yeah, he's
hmm
been working on it for 30 years, taking pictures, getting it written. And so yeah, but it's great because it's a good reference for these plants that you don't find in a lot of other places.
Question
Oh,
from Jessica. Jessica's asking, are most of the plants you showed safe for dogs?
here's what I'd recommend. I never trust my memory, and Jay, feel free to jump in. I always say check with the ASPCA website. The University of North Carolina Gardener's Toolbox also is great about talking about what's toxic to pets as well as people. And so um, I I would say check before you put it in the garden. I don't know, that's another good, I haven't really looked specifically for dog safe plants, sorry. And I don't know if you have either, Jay.
The thing I'll say that's interesting, and definitely like you're saying, like look it up, I guess. But what's interesting about plants, especially the ornamental plants that have been introduced into our whatever the norm, is that they're often poisonous. And then what I mean by that is that there's a lot of plants that are the reason why they're resistant to pest. I'm talking about the introduced
Oh,
ones.
pest resistant
And
plants.
pest resistant, right? Is because they're poisonous. So I remember my son, we were in like a botanical garden and he's like, "Oh, these are beautiful flowers." Like, and he was like, I don't know. He was young. He was like, "Can I eat this?" I was like, "I don't know,
Every
you never
kid
know. It
does
could be
that.
poisonous." Right. And but I think for the most part, native plants to Wisconsin, from the research I've done, like are less there I haven't found many that are toxic to dogs and other domestic animals, but I mean I can't guarantee anything, but I think a lot of the plants that thrive, and do well in perennial, when you go to Menards or wherever you go to buy your plants, like perennials, like they do well here because they're resistant because animals don't want to eat them. They're not, so I think one thing with native plants that we all have to understand is that they are, you know, they're meant to be here. And so the animals that live here like them. And so one thing to I think recommend is that when you have these baby plants from our plant cell and whatnot, if you have a lot of bunnies in your yard or you have a lot of maybe deer, like it's important to understand that these are from here. So those animals may like those baby leaves and to maybe provide some protection with like some wire little cages or something, especially in that first year. And that kind of tells you that they're less poisonous. If deer are eating them and rabbits are eating them, they're probably less likely to cause harm to you, your animals. But you know, I think yeah, probably double checking that is probably a good idea.
And you know what? I'll go through the list and I'm trying to think of I will go through the list and give it to Kelly to add
Sure.
to the YouTube channel. I'll go through the list and identify any that I can find that are toxic to
Right.
pets. And but I need to do a little research, so I'll do that tomorrow morning,
Sure.
and I'll share that with you too, Jay, so we both know. It's just always, and then people have different reactions too, allergic reactions and things too.
Right.
So it's always best to double check. And not that I don't like dogs, but I've always had cats in my house, not outside. So it's one of those things I check and don't trust my memory. So always double
Right.
check. University of North Carolina, Gardner's Toolbox, great information on toxicity, ASPCA, but I'll look through this list and I'll share it with you too, Jay. And according to what I can find, I will share that with you, Kelly, and she'll include that in the mailing.
Right. Well,
So,
and I think something to consider, like we're talking about native plants obviously tonight, but like this is an important thing to do for non-native plants as well, which tend to be in like the category of potentially poisonous. Like, what's the one? I actually ate this and got my stomach pumped as a kid. Lily of the Valley.
oh yeah, that's
That
invasive anyway. You don't want to plant that
you
or
don't want
eat
it, but
it.
it's everywhere. It's everywhere, and
It is
all my
invasive,
neighbors
so
seem to have it. And I'm like,
yeah,
hey, you have kids, you should really be aware of this. I went to the
right,
hospital for this, so
right,
I think
yeah,
it's something to be aware of just generally. But
right.
I don't think natives are as typically.
Oh, okay. I was kind of cheating. I got to quit looking at the questions because I got fooled last night.
Oh, I went out of order last night. Yeah.
I know.
Yeah, just want to share. I did put the link to that ASPCA
Thank
list
you.
in the chat. So yeah, if anyone here, if you're interested, check that out.
I just want to comment too that Karen mentioned that milkweeds are generally toxic. Yes. And one of the things that's weird about them though, and I don't ever usually recommend foraging because you never know, but people do forage the new growth on those. So it's a timing thing too. But yeah, that milky sap is an issue. So there are some that are definitely poisonous. And, you know, as a person who raises a lot of cultivated plants as well as native plants, I love them all. Just being aware, some are not toxic, how they've been managed, that type of thing is also important too. So thanks for pointing that out, Karen.
And also, I know Jay mentioned before the importance of maybe putting some chicken wire around young plants. Speaking from personal experience, the rabbits love young coneflower. Although
Oh,
I've had good experience with like Joe Pye weed. They tend to stay away from that. But yeah, any young plant, it's the tender leaves, they'll probably go after that. So chicken
and
wire is your friend.
and the higher the population, last year was a great rabbit year, and the scarcer the food, I found a deer pulling stuff out that they don't eat, but they pull it out of the ground. So good advice, Jada. Give them a little protection till they get rooted in, especially.
So, a question from Cindy. Cindy's wondering, do you cut back or ever burn? So,
Here's the thing. I used to say on a beautiful day, go out and cut back your perennials. I always left them stand, but here's the deal. The pollinators, many of them are still in those stems until we get consistently 50-degree weather. So waiting until, we're seeing signs of new growth, cut them back, stack them out of sight if you can't wait, chopping up that debris and using it as mulch in the soil's organic matter is great. Burning is
Mhm.
not usually possible in most
Mhm.
municipalities. And I'm not sure if
Mhm.
anybody really burns rain gardens as
Mhm.
usually they're small enough you can manage them and usually in a more urban setting or suburban setting. So, but cutting back to get rid of some of that debris and make room for new growth. Some years I'm a little late to cut back. It'll just kind of fill in. But they also found one of the other things we found recently is if you cut back to like 18 inches and then leave the dead stems or at least a portion of them, the native bees spend their summers there. The new growth covers it. So even if you took that hedge cutter that Jay was talking about and cut back the dead stems to like 18 inches, that's going to allow the new growth on the taller plants to go through, comb out the dead leaves on your grass. And that's just taking your fingers and running it through the leaves and stack it out of sight, throw it in the compost pile or chop it up and use it as mulch in the garden. It's a great way to put back right in the garden. Pretty soon it's going to be so thick, you may have to just haul it out and that's okay. Use it in your compost pile.
Get a nice tip from Lisa. Lisa says in the chat, when you remove buckthorn, using the stems and branches to create barriers is a great way to protect new plants.
And get some use out of it, as long as they don't have the seeds on it. Great idea, Lisa, because if you got to deal with buckthorn, you want to find some benefit of all that work you do. Great idea. They are prickly. They're pretty wood too, so.
Next question's from Kate. Kate says, I've had a false blue indigo for a very long time. I've noticed in the last few years it has the donut effect, dead in the center. Normally with perennials, that's a sign to divide. I know dividing this plant is difficult. Do you have any suggestions?
I have not tried it with this plant. I have divided, I have moved to Baptisia before. It's not easy. So one option could be trying to take portions off the edge of that donut. I've done this with ornamental grasses. I do not know if this will work with Baptisia. So if you decide that you have no other choice, you might want to cut into the crown of the plant, do a cross hatch, and sometimes that's enough to stimulate new growth. It works great on grasses. They're a little bit different than Baptisia. If you've ever grown Willow Amsonia, it has big fleshy roots too. I ended up using a shovel, a spade, and I had to use a Sawzall to divide it into smaller pieces. So your key is going to be getting as much of the root system as you can. And I think if you maybe even, if I was you, I would go for the side, take a chunk off the side rather than try to dig the whole clump up. It sounds like it's pretty big. I don't know, Jay, if you've had any other experience. I have, mine have held their center pretty well. But
Yeah, I mean, I split with my neighbor. My neighbor had it, and I split it, and it worked okay. So
okay.
I mean, it could be something you try to do, um, or you could buy it for $3 from the wholesale too. But yeah, no, I think it, as much as it has a taproot, I think I've had success splitting it too. I mean, I don't know.
Good,
It's always
cool.
something you can try.
You'll burn off some calories. You can have dessert after you do that.
Question from Barb. Barb is wondering if you have any suggestions for small shrubs that work in shady rain gardens.
So my first thought is always choke berries, aronias. They take wet, they'll take dry once they're established. There are some smaller cultivars available now. The straight species of black chokeberry grows about 4 to 6 feet tall. Red chokeberry is taller. That's a really good option. I have not grown, I'm thinking of other shade plants that would do well. Elderberry's great, but it's huge. It would take over to its suckers readily. Um, Native, but not to Wisconsin, but native to Southeast US, Clethra summer sweet is a summer bloomer. It will take wet soils with good drainage, but you'll have amended the soil and it will take shade. Itea, which is Virginia sweet spire, again, they're native not to Wisconsin, so depending on where you live, they will take some shady conditions. Meadow sweet is a perennial though. Um, that will take shade. It looks kind of shrub-like. Those are the ones that first come to mind. Dogwood, red twig dogwood was a good one. There are some, again, the straight species is a colonizer and can get pretty good size, 4 to 6 feet tall. There are some more compact varieties. Durvilla likes it dry and will tolerate shade. So in the drier parts of your rain garden, Durvilla, which is bush honeysuckle, and it's a good 3 feet tall and it does tend to colonize, but it takes shade, flowers in the summer, just like the Clethra and the Itea do. The Aronias, if you don't mind using a cultivar of the black chokeberry, there's one called a low hedge that is more of a clumper that's about 4 feet tall. Then there's the low mound or low hedge mound that grows about 2 feet tall, more of a arching. These are favorites of the animals, so watch the rabbits for those. But they have flowers in the spring, fruit that the birds eventually eat, but they are really astringent, so they wait till they ferment. Red fall color, nice leaves in the summer. So those are some that come to mind in terms of being moisture tolerant that would take those conditions in the shade.
Somebody threw out the idea of button bush, which I've heard
Oh,
also of.
thank you. It's excellent. It's a bigger plant. So thank you for mentioning it's native to marsh areas. It's great for pollinators. I'm so glad you mentioned it. Summer bloomer. There's sugar shack and ping pong that are shorter. The straight species is rather tall, but it will take part shade. I haven't pushed it in too heavy a shade. I usually see it in full sun and part shade, but it'd be worth a try. It's a tall one though, so kind of check the height on that as well. Thank you for that. It's a wonderful plant to include in your garden.
So again, if you have any questions, please drop those in the Q&A. I'm just taking a look at the chat as well. There's a question from Crystal. Crystal says, we'll be removing the tree trunk of a tree we had to take down in the fall. Would that large space be able to be reused for a rain garden?
Here's the deal with here's the deal with when you remove a stump, if you have the stump ground out, often a lot of those stump grindings remain in the soil. And so it can temporarily tie up the nitrogen in the soil. So you may want to do a little additional fertilizer to help compensate if you notice your plants are a little stunted or yellow. But as long as you can get the stump out, or you might want to, there are using like copper sulfate that you can drill in and eventually eats away the trunk. But if you do the stump grindings, just be aware, get those out, use them in a pathway or someplace you're not trying to grow something as a mulch. And then just a little bit. If you know me, I work with Milorganite, so it's a low nitrogen, slow release, or use an organic fertilizer if you prefer to feed the microorganisms that break down those stump grindings. So they use that, and you can feed your plants, and they won't be stunted. You're going to amend the soil anyway. You're going to have a fairly big hole, so it's going to be a start of getting that hole dug. I don't know if you've done that, Jay, in terms of it seems like a great, you've got to have sunshine now. You've got a good start for that hole you need to have to get that lower indentation for your rain garden.
I mean, I haven't had experience with it, but I mean, I think it seems like it would work. Good sun.
Yeah, I think it's good. I noticed someone recommended bladder nut in the chat. Great plant, but it's a tree, a large shrub or a small tree. Last night I did plants for shade. And there's a handout, and that's also on the Milwaukee Public Library. They're not all native plants. I included quite a few native plants, and I talked about shrubs and large shrubs and small trees, and talked about some that were moist. So quite a few of those were native plants as well. So you might want to check that handout, is also on their YouTube video. Because we talked about bladder nut, that's what made me think about it. Short-lived, forms a thicket, but it's got cool flowers and fruit, and native. So nice choice too.
So if you go to mpl.org, and then at the top of the page, there's an icon for our YouTube channel. So when you click on that, last night's presentation should pop up right away there. So check that out. Let's see, you've got a question from Cynthia. Cynthia says, my soil is very hard. How do I know which plants will work best and prepare that area for planting?
One of the things with the preparing, so we have planning your rain garden is one of the seminars we've done in the past, and planting your rain garden, and soil preparation is critical for any garden. As a gardener, so incorporating some compost or other type of organic matter. So when you prepare that site, you're going to prepare it so that the water running off of the hard surfaces, your lawn, is captured in your rain garden. And the Department of Natural Resources, there's a link on Fresh Coast Guardians, has great information and links to resources. But they'll talk about how you want to build your rain garden. So you're going to capture the runoff, being indented so that the water has a place to capture, but drains within 24 to 36 hours. And if you have heavy clay, hard soil, you're going to need to do something. You're going to need to amend it. You're going to need to work in compost. Some people will buy some good planting mix. Just make sure it's better than what you've got in your ground. So preparing the soil is going to be critical. And then once it's prepared, then the plants, there's some of them on the list that are clay tolerant. On Neil DeBole's website, Prairie Nursery, he's got a list of clay busters. And I'm guessing if your soil's hard, it's clay. And that gives you a whole list of plants that are really good at breaking through that clay soil. And it's a lot of the ones we've talked about tonight too, like the purple prairie clover and the baptisia will cut through that. The deeply rooted plants, coneflowers are good at that. The grasses are good at that as well. But he's got a whole section of plants that could be, as you're looking at the plant sale list, look at that as well. And the handout, I talk about those that are good for clay. So I would start with those that really tolerate clay soil. He also talks about those. The kits, Jay, I know maybe the different collections, and I apologize, I haven't looked at what the different collections are, but you've got them for different growing conditions, correct?
Yeah, it's mostly like like sun, is it part sun or shade, and the kind of light conditions, and then also moisture,
Okay.
height, and salt tolerant is one of them, because one of the things that we get, at least in the city, is people are, well, they like to plant near the sidewalk maybe, and you need to consider that not all natives love salt. So we have some ones that are more salt tolerant, like that terrace area, that tree lawn area. You could plant in there. That's an easy way to capture a lot of water. But yeah, they are grouped kind of based on conditions, but it's mostly to do with moisture and
Sunlight.
sun
Okay.
exposure. Yeah.
Okay. But check out, you know, and yeah, Neil's a friend of mine, but his website is such a good reference and it's free to go there and read the information, whether you shop there or not, or you buy your plants at the plant sale. It's just good information that's helpful. And so is Prairie Moon's website as well. I find I reference both of those quite often.
Got a question from Jenny about the plant sale. Jenny's wondering, is there a reason that there's a $45 minimum purchase for the plant sale? I only wanted to purchase $24 worth because I'm on a budget. Jay, is there any wiggle room in how much people can buy, or is that minimum firm?
It's pretty firm. And the reason why it's only a year old now, and essentially like to keep the prices where they're at. The greenhouse can't really and it's kind of a complicated, convoluted answer, so I'll try to keep it as simple as I can. But every single order requires like somebody to move it, and labor, everything. Essentially, if one order is of just a few plants, it's the same amount of work as like a tray. And this is getting into a lot of the details, but essentially, to keep the prices low, to have a minimum order allows the greenhouse to sell them at such a cheap price. It's kind of like if you think of wholesale or bulk, kind of thing. And we didn't want to keep raising the prices to a point where it made it harder for people to get them. And the other point of all of this is really, this is a rain garden plant sale. It's meant to, like, where you're starting a full garden to capture water on your downspout. It's not necessarily a sale to just replace plants that you're feeling like, um, yeah, you have some bare spots. That being said, we do have a few workshops coming up with MPL in March, where we will be offering free plants. So if you are really
Oh,
struggling, or you want some help with that, like, I would encourage you to sign up for those rain garden workshops that are in person. And then you can pick a kit to get a plant for free, or get plants for free. So if that price point is not good for you to buy $24, you can get them for $0 if you come. So that's something to keep in mind.
and the other thing is find a friend too,
Sure.
share it. And one of the things I think you're going to be setting the tone for the neighborhood if you're the first one to put a rain garden in. And, you know, that's great that more and more people will do it. And so I think pretty soon you'll be able to get your own tray, or maybe they'll be willing to help sponsor it for you too. Because, it's good for your neighbor may appreciate if you're capturing the rainwater, so, but yeah, that's a great deal, Jay. Wow.
Yeah, no, it's new this year. We're trying it out. There's limited capacity and things like
Right.
that. So I hope that there's still some space. But yeah, we're trying to get plants in people's hands as much as possible. And so that's one of the things we're offering through our rain garden workshops is, at least a free kit. So yeah.
And they sign up on the Fresh Coast Guardians website for those workshops. Is that correct? If there are any spaces left, is that where they sign up, Jay?
They go to Fresh Coast Guardians or Milwaukee Public Library. We sent our newsletter out, and that's
Okay.
that's that's. But I think if you go to freshcoastguardians.com, we have our rain garden workshops up there. I'm sure
Okay.
they're MPL as well. I can't confirm whether it's sold out or not, because I'm not. I mean, I could look into it, but maybe not right
No,
now.
they can, but that's where they can go and find out.
Right,
Okay,
right. Yep.
cool. That's excellent. That's a great deal.
Yeah, no, I'm trying to find ways to make it easier for people. And I'm glad that people are asking about shrubs and other things. Like we're not just, any way you can find to get more plants in the ground, whether it's shrubs, trees, native, wildflowers, it's all going to be better for our local ecosystem and soaking up water and encouraging pollinators.
Somebody mentioned too, Johnson's Nursery, and they do have a good collection. They've been selling native trees and shrubs for quite a while, and they do have, thank you for pointing that out, Lisa. They do have a good knowledge base too. So if you're in the Milwaukee metro area, that's a great place to go see plants and purchase them as well.
Thanks everyone for your questions. So we will be sending a link out in the follow-up email that will have a link to this recording, as well as a link to the plant sale. And then I think we had some of the resources that we are discussing tonight as well. So because you're here tonight, you'll be on that email list to receive that follow-up email. I'm checking the chat if I missed any questions. All right. I think that's it for tonight. Thank you so much, everyone. Thanks for all of your thoughtful questions. Again, check out mpl.org, our YouTube channel. We've got a lot of recordings posted from previous seasons. So, once this one is up, you can watch it again. And then also check out those other workshops and webinars that we've hosted with Melinda and MMSD. And do a deep dive while you're prepping for this season. So a lot of
We'll
great
be here
information.
soon. Thank you, Jay, for joining
Mhm.
us. I really appreciate
Yeah.
it. And thank you, Kelly, as always, for hosting, and all of you for taking time to learn more and help make a difference, because together we can improve things for ourselves, the environment, our water quality, and all those winged visitors to our gardens. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. Have a great evening. We'll see you next time.
Yeah.
Take care.
Thanks. Bye now.